Hey, this is Mike, the Run Testers. This is the Saucony Kinvara 15. It's fair to say an iconic shoe in Saucony's running shoe range. Now, it's also fair to say that the Kinvara 14 possibly split fans of this shoe and took it in a slightly different direction. Now, there are some changes here with the new shoe, and we'll get into what those are exactly. Then myself and Kieran will give you some early impressions on the Kinvara 15 and let you know how it's shaping up so far. Here's your lowdown on the Saucony Kinvara 15. Like previous Kinvaras, this is a shoe built for your faster daily runs and is priced at £130 in the UK or $120 in the US. Weight-wise, a men's UK size 8 weighed in at 192 grams, so sticks in around the same weight as the Kinvara 14 and still makes it a pretty lightweight daily trainer to lace up. It's still a shoe with a 4mm drop, though the stack heights have been reduced, coming in at 29mm at the heel and 25mm at the forefoot to keep you nice and close to the ground. At the upper, there's a single layer mesh one with a PWRRUN sock collar too for that added step-in comfort. Below that lies a PWRRUN midsole, so it's not the bouncier PWRRUN PB kind used in Saucony's Endorphin shoe line, but does promise to come alive at faster paces with a slightly firmer edge. The outsole is an EVA based one with a ridge design to offer strong traction and strong flexibility.
So then when it comes to fit, I've run in a UK 8.5, which is my regular running shoe size in Saucony. Normally in Saucony shoes, I find the fit to be absolutely spot on. Just the shape of the foot really works well with my foot in terms of the width and the length. But with these shoes, although you've got lots of nice wiggle room in the toe box, I have got, about a thumb's length at the end here as well, which is sort of ample. I just feel they're a little bit narrow and a little bit long. You can see they're sort of got a bit narrow. They're not tight, they're not overly snug. Just doesn't quite feel as comfortable. It's a bit like I've got a bit of extra length under the shoe here. Having said that, they lock down fairly well. There's something that with this kind of lacing structure that doesn't quite sit right with my kind of high insteps, and it's just not quite as disappearing as some of the other Saucony shoes. It doesn't disrupt my run, but I'm a bit more aware that these shoes are on my feet than some of the disappearing fit you find in the other ones. So yeah, I mean, you've got medium padded tongues, that takes away the kind of lace pinch as well. They're a bit of flex in the tongues, nice and comfortable. Got these medium padded heel collars back here, which for me hold pretty well. There's not a huge amount of structure to the heel, so if you like a heel counter for a bit more support, that's, there's not a huge amount there, but there's no rubbing. I don't get any slipping from the heels. And overall, I would recommend going true to size in these shoes. I just don't find the fit to be as spot on as some of the other Saucony shoes.
So in terms of fit, I've got this Saucony Kinvara 15 in a UK size 8. That is my typical running shoe size, and I would say the fit has been very good for me in that first run. No issues to report as yet. I would say that it is a pretty narrow fitting shoe. I think if you compare it to something like something the Saucony's Endorphin range, which I think in general is a bit more accommodating in terms of that fit, I wouldn't say that's the same story here with the Kinvara 15, so that's something to be mindful of here. Which for me, my kind of skinny narrow feet's been absolutely fine. But yeah, something to factor in here with this shoe. In terms of other areas, I think space up front in the toe box has been very good. What I'd like to see, enough space at the front and at the sides of my toes, not too snug in that run, not too tight. And get into the midfoot. Generally, the hold feels pretty good there. I think it could benefit from being a little tighter in there in terms of kind of locking things in, but ultimately it's felt fine in that run. Then when you get into the kind of lacing, it's pretty traditional, a little bit of stretch to those laces, which I think, helps kind of pull it into this tongue, which is, it's thin, but it's not super thin, and it does have a little bit of padding there to offer some support on the top of your foot. Then you get into the kind of heel collar here, which again is kind of good padding. Again, not overly generous. You're getting this heel counter that's pretty flexible as well too. I have had no kind of irritation there as well on that first run. So yeah, I think the main thing to take away is I feel like it should be true to size if you are, or you do have kind of narrow feet. The main thing that really is that it is a kind of skinny profile shoe, so that's something to keep in mind with the Kinvara 15. But yeah, so far, no major issues. I personally would be happy going true to size based on my first run.
So I've actually done 2 or 3 short runs in the Saucony Kinvara 15, around 15 miles or so. I've mixed up the paces from easy to interval fast, all of that on the road. This is also my first outing in the Kinvara, but I know that this shoe has a loyal following for what it delivers, and it sounds like Saucony hasn't meddled too much with this latest version, dropped the stack a bit. But that's commendable in itself, I think. But now the first thing you notice when you put the shoe on is how light it is. At 206 grams, it's practically race shoe light. and it feels it on the foot as well. It's nimble and it feels racy, but without that kind of minimal strip back kind of hugging of an all-out carbon race. You've still got traditional heel collars, all of those extra bits of comfort there. The next thing you feel is the firmness of that PWRRUN cushioning compared to the softer PWRRUN Plus of the Ride 17, or the softer, more springy PWRRUN PB that you'll find in the Endorphin Speed 4. I immediately knew that this was a shoe that would encourage you to pick up your feet fast. It doesn't afford as much protection as shoes with softer, more accommodating foams, or just more foam. You know, I find there's not really enough PWRRUN underfoot here to make me want to take this shoe into those longer miles, you know, beyond the half marathon distances. It's definitely a shorter run shoe for me. And that's coming from someone who quite likes firmer, more grounded shoes. But yeah, it definitely immediately puts it into the pile of shoes that I think most runners will use for shorter, faster efforts, or shorter, easier efforts. Now, as I mentioned in the fit, I'm not in love with the shaping of the uppers here. Saucony tends to nail this bit, but I find the Kinvara a bit narrow and a bit long. The uppers themselves are actually nice and flexible and airy, but it's just a bit more awkward than the loveliest appearing fit that you'll find on the Speed 4 and the Ride 17 when it comes to that kind of foothold. The firmer midsole makes for reliable landings and toe-offs. The stability is good and you know what you're going to get in each step here with the shoe. There's a happy consistency of the ride, which I really like, and those transitions as well. But I'd definitely say this is a shoe that requires you to bring the effort in many ways, while some shoes sort of give you that punch. This lower profile, more direct shoe with a low 4mm stack kind of asks you to do a big chunk of the work, I think. You're relying on moving fast with a bit of response, more than you would with something like a sort of newer, punchier Hoka Mach X2 or even the Speed 4. It reminds me actually a little of the original kind of Brooks Hyperion Max. It's best when you're running fast with light feet and a high turnover.
So I've just done the one run in the Saucony Kinvara 15 so far, so I've started to pick up my training a little bit more. I haven't really been training. I now do have a race on the horizon. I've got the Manchester half coming up in a few weeks time, so I'm starting to build a little bit. I've always kind of got a bit of mileage in the locker, but it's about kind of picking up that quicker stuff. So this was ultimately a good shoe to kind of pick up for the session today. I had kind of 5 miles to do, kind of a tempo style run. I wanted to keep it below kind of 8-minute miles, so you know, pretty much tempo speed for me, kind of around my kind of marathon pace, but you know, ultimately not going all out in that run, but definitely putting some quicker time in the Kinvara 15. Now, I haven't used the Kinvara for a few generations now, but I know what it's about. I know what it's always been about. I know that it's changed over time, maybe to the detriment of, you know, people who really love this shoe. Obviously the drop has stayed the same, but actually the stack heights have dropped a little bit, and I think, you know, ultimately what that's done is getting it back to what the Kinvara was. Now you're getting that PWRRUN midsole, so not the latest PWRRUN PB that we're seeing in the Endorphin range, so not that bouncy, lively, slightly softer kind of feeling midsole foam, something that's slightly firmer, more responsive in terms of that overall feel, and obviously you're not getting a huge amount of it as well too. What that ultimately does, and what I ultimately felt, is, you know, it's keeping you a little bit more connected with the ground. And I think if you want that or like that from a shoe, then that's ultimately what I've seen. I know ultimately the ride felt very good for me. As I said, I was running at kind of my, you know, around about my kind of marathon pace, and it felt very kind of, you know, nice to kind of roll through in this shoe. There's a nice kind of rocker in it, and you know, it felt pretty comfortable at kind of maintaining that pace. I think the other thing I really noticed about is the outsole. There's obviously kind of this kind of ridged outsole that, you know, I was in slightly wet conditions and it kind of gripped very well. I felt very nimble in this shoe. And while it is, you know, not that kind of bouncy, kind of, you know, more, I would say more desirable PWRRUN PB, I think the PWRRUN can work, I think, still in certain shoes, and I think in, you know, in certain formations. And I think in the Kinvara 15, I feel like, you know, it feels like a good match in terms of the shoe, in terms of the profile, in terms of what you're getting, in terms of that drop and stack height. And it felt like I could roll, as I say, roll through really nicely at that pace. And I felt, you know, I think the first thing for me was really, it's just a light shoe. You know, it weighed in kind of below 200 grams for me. I love a light daily trainer shoe. This is absolutely a light one. And it's, you know, and yeah, I think, you know, the main thing for me is that it kind of rolled through really nicely. I think, you know, it's not overly firm, you know, it's responsive. And when you get going at a pace, it felt very comfortable to do that and be able to maintain that. The thing for me really is, you know, I want to know whether I'd want to run longer in this shoe, because ultimately I think when I look at kind of an up-tempo daily trainer that I want to go and do longer runs in, I probably do prefer something that we're getting from the kind of endorphin range, having a little bit more in terms of that stack, but still having that kind of nimble feel, which I do think you can get in within Saucony's range and outside of it. So whether the Kinvara 15 can deliver that ultimately, that's to be seen. But in that first run, as I said, the kind of 5 mile tempo run, it felt very comfortable doing that, and it didn't feel awkward. So yeah, for me, a pretty solid first run in it. I think once you get to grips with what the Kinvara 15 is about, I feel like there's a shoe there to really get a lot out of. And as I said, I really like the fact that it's a nice lightweight shoe. And ultimately, I think the changes here, as I said, I haven't used the previous Kinvara, but from the previous Kinvaras that I've used, I feel like what you're getting from the upper side of things in terms of comfort, in terms of that outsole, grip, traction, and actually adding to the agility and the nimbleness of the shoe, I think, yeah, there's a lot to like here so far.
First impressions then, after my first few runs, the Kinvara 15 didn't really wow me, but that makes me think that I've changed. I've sort of been suckered into the bigger stack, springy world of super daily trainers. The Kinvara 15 now, by comparison, feels like the kind of shoe I used to love before we were treated to things like the Hoka Mach X2 or the Speed 4. It's got that kind of light cutback feel with now a slightly old school directness, the lower drop and the firmer, more responsive ride that's kind of either starting to feel a bit dated or the way things should have stayed, depending on your preferences and where you come from with these shoes. I know Kinvara fans like that. So if you like that kind of ride, the Kinvara, I think, still delivers it really well. I think there are some big positives here. It's a shoe that takes a while to break in, but it balances a lower, more trad stack with good ground contact and just enough protection really nicely. It does that job really nicely if that's the kind of thing that you like. There's just enough rocker to make the transition smooth enough and give that feel that what you've got here is a slightly modernised old school shoe. Not maximal, not minimal, but somewhere in between. And I think it's pretty keenly priced too.
So some initial thoughts on the Saucony Kinvara 15, and very much early thoughts. I've just done one run in the shoe so far, and I would say so far it's felt pretty good. I think, in that tempo run, it felt well suited to that type of run. It feels very low profile. I felt very connected to the ground. It felt agile. It felt nimble. I like, what's happening here with, what you're getting in terms of the outsole. It feels super light as well too. I love the weight of this shoe. And yeah, it just feels, I think possibly this is going to appeal to people that love the older Kinvaras, maybe didn't love the direction or were loving the direction that maybe Saucony was taking this shoe. And it does feel like it's pared things back a little bit, and to ensure that it can be the shoe that people know and love. Now, in terms of, where it kind of sits for me, and it reminds me of shoes, it kind of sits in the same category of shoes for me, of things like the Hoka Mach 6, probably more so the Mach 5. I think possibly you could look at something like the New Balance Rebel V4. It's slightly different, maybe has a little bit more in that stack, slightly softer as well, but I think can be, used in the same kind of fashion as the Saucony Kinvara. And then I would probably add to, and which I've tested recently, is the Brooks Hyperion Max 2, which does have a plate, which this doesn't, but I think ultimately has a similar kind of feel to me, slightly firmer edge to it, maybe has a slightly bigger stack, but ultimately I think it's going to be used or utilised for the same types of runs. I think ultimately what I want to see is how it's going to fare on longer runs. I think maybe where I might be crying out for a bit more kind of in that kind of midsole, but ultimately I think in terms of that kind of up-tempo, faster training, it feels like it's going to be well suited to that. It's at a good price as well, so it's cheaper than other, Saucony kind of up-tempo daily trainers. You're going to look at the Endorphin Speed, obviously is another shoe that's obviously with that kind of newer midsole foam, going to probably give you something a bit more bouncy, a bit more lively. This is a very different, proposition here. And maybe, as I said, a departure from the previous shoes, maybe throwing it back to the Kinvara of old, which I think is probably going to be a good thing, and a thing that people are going to want to hear, particularly if you are a Kinvara fan. So yeah, for me, off that first run, it's felt pretty solid. I haven't seen anything to kind of feel worried about. And in terms of what I think and what I expected this shoe to be, that's kind of what I'm seeing so far. Plenty more testing to do, but so far feels pretty solid. And yeah, I think I'm liking it more than the previous Kinvaras that I've tested. Okay, so there you have it. That's some early impressions on the Saucony Kinvara 15. Obviously, plenty more testing to do before we get to our multi-tester review with this shoe. Now, until then, if you've got any questions about the Kinvara 15 or other shoes you'd like to know how it compares to as we are testing, do let us know in the comments. As always, like and subscribe, hit that little bell to find out about our latest videos. And yeah, we'll see you in the next Run Testers video.